The thunder of aircraft engines shattered the pre-dawn silence over Truk Lagoon on February 17, 1944, as Lieutenant Commander James Harrison Mitchell watched his unauthorized flight plan unfold into the most devastating naval ambush in Pacific War history. Through the cockpit of his Grumman Hellcat, Mitchell could see the entire Japanese combined fleet spread below him, like sitting ducks in a shooting gallery, their massive battleships and cruisers caught completely defenseless in what they believed was their most secure anchorage. The young pilot from Omaha, Nebraska, had broken direct orders from his squadron commander just 30 minutes earlier, choosing to lead his wing through a gap in the coral reef that intelligence had deemed impassable for a coordinated attack. Now, as the first bombs began falling on unsuspecting enemy vessels, Mitchell realized his act of tactical disobedience was about to rewrite the mathematics of naval warfare forever. The radio crackled with Japanese voices screaming coordinates and damage reports, their panic audible even through the static and foreign language, while below him the pride of the Imperial Navy began to burn. No one in the Fifth Fleet Task Force knew that one pilot's refusal to follow standard attack protocols that morning would transform what was planned as a limited raid into the complete annihilation of Japan's most powerful naval stronghold. James Harrison Mitchell had grown up in the shadow of grain elevators and railroad yards in Omaha, where his father worked as a switchman for the Union Pacific and his mother took in laundry to help feed their family of 6 children. Born in 1921, Mitchell was the third son in a household where military service was considered both duty and opportunity, a chance to see the world beyond the flat horizons of Nebraska farmland. His older brothers had already enlisted by the time Pearl Harbor thrust America into global conflict, one joining the Army Air Corps and another shipping out with the Marines. Mitchell himself had been working at the Offutt Airfield as a civilian mechanic, learning the intricate systems of military aircraft while earning money for college when the Japanese attack changed everything. He enlisted in the Navy the day after President Roosevelt's declaration of war, driven not by bloodlust or patriotic fervor, but by a quiet understanding that the skills he'd developed with engines and navigation systems could serve a purpose larger than himself. During flight training at Pensacola, his instructors noticed Mitchell's unusual ability to visualize three-dimensional tactical problems, often finding solutions that violated textbook approaches but proved remarkably effective in practice. He demonstrated an intuitive grasp of aerial geometry that allowed him to calculate attack angles and fuel consumption rates in his head, while other pilots struggled with slide rules and charts. His fellow trainees nicknamed him Calculator, not because he relied on mathematics, but because he seemed to perform complex calculations instinctively, as if his mind operated like a mechanical computer designed specifically for aerial combat. By the time Mitchell completed advanced carrier training and joined Fighting Squadron 15 aboard the USS Enterprise, he had earned a reputation as someone who questioned everything but never challenged authority unnecessarily. His squadron mates respected his technical knowledge and flying ability, though some wondered whether his tendency to analyze and critique standard procedures might prove problematic in combat situations where quick obedience could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Mitchell's first taste of real combat came during the Marshall Islands campaign in early 1944, where he demonstrated both exceptional flying skills and an uncomfortable willingness to modify attack plans in real time based on battlefield conditions he observed from the air, after one particularly successful mission where he had deviated from assigned targets to strike a more valuable installation. His squadron commander warned him about the dangers of freelance heroics in coordinated operations. Mitchell listened respectfully, but privately wondered whether rigid adherence to pre-planned attacks might actually increase casualties by failing to adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations. He kept these thoughts to himself, understanding that military effectiveness required both discipline and flexibility, though he remained convinced that innovation within the framework of orders could often achieve better results than blind obedience to plans developed far from the actual battlefield. During quiet moments in his bunk, Mitchell would study intelligence reports and tactical analyses, searching for patterns and opportunities that might not be apparent to planners working with incomplete information about enemy capabilities and positions. The strategic importance of Truk Lagoon in early 1944 cannot be overstated in the context of the Pacific War's overall trajectory. This massive natural harbor in the Caroline Islands had served as the primary forward base for the Japanese combined fleet since 1942, earning the nickname Gibraltar of the Pacific for its seemingly impregnable defensive position and concentration of naval power. The lagoon itself was a coral atoll roughly 30 miles in diameter, surrounded by a barrier reef that provided natural protection against submarine attack while offering numerous deep-water anchorages capable of accommodating the largest battleships and aircraft carriers in the Imperial Navy. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the same commander who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor, had established Truk as the nerve center for Japanese naval operations throughout the Central Pacific, concentrating not only warships but also supply vessels, repair facilities, and administrative headquarters that coordinated military activities across thousands of square miles of ocean. American intelligence estimates suggested that at any given time, Truk harbored between 60 and 80 major warships, including battleships of the Yamato class, fleet carriers, heavy cruisers, and dozens of destroyers and submarines. The base also supported nearly 400 aircraft of various types, from Zero fighters to Betty bombers, making it not just a naval stronghold, but a major air power projection platform that threatened any Allied advance toward the Japanese home islands. The mathematical reality of assaulting such a concentration of enemy power through conventional means was sobering for American strategists. Previous attempts to neutralize heavily defended Japanese positions had required massive commitments of ships, aircraft, and personnel, often resulting in casualties that exceeded the strategic value of the objectives achieved. Truk's defenses included not only the ships and planes based there, but also coastal artillery installations, radar networks, and fighter squadrons specifically tasked with intercepting incoming attacks. Intelligence analysts calculated that a direct assault on the lagoon would require at least 6 fleet carriers, 8 battleships, and supporting cruisers and destroyers, numbering in the dozens, with projected losses that could cripple American naval capabilities in the Pacific for months afterward. The Japanese had learned from earlier defeats that concentrated defensive positions could inflict disproportionate casualties on attackers, particularly when those attackers were forced to operate far from their own bases and supply lines. Admiral Chester Nimitz and his staff spent weeks developing alternative approaches to neutralizing Truk's threat, without triggering a catastrophic naval battle that might reverse recent American gains in the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. The solution they eventually adopted relied heavily on surprise, speed, and overwhelming initial force applied before Japanese defenders could organize effective resistance. However, the success of this strategy depended critically on achieving complete tactical surprise, which meant that even small deviations from planned attack profiles could compromise the entire operation. The weeks leading up to Operation Hailstone saw intensive planning sessions aboard every carrier in Task Force 58, as squadron commanders briefed their pilots on attack routes, target assignments, and emergency procedures designed to maximize damage while minimizing friendly casualties. Mitchell attended these briefings with growing concern about what he perceived as overly rigid flight plans that failed to account for the unpredictable nature of aerial combat over heavily defended targets. The standard approach called for coordinated waves of dive bombers and torpedo planes protected by fighter escorts flying predetermined patterns at specific altitudes and headings. While this method had proved effective against isolated targets or lightly defended installations, Mitchell wondered whether such predictable tactics might actually play into Japanese defensive planning, particularly if enemy commanders had studied previous American attacks and developed countermeasures accordingly. During one particularly detailed planning session, he raised questions about alternative attack routes that might confuse defensive coordination, suggesting that small groups of aircraft approaching from unexpected directions could create more chaos and confusion than large formations following textbook procedures. His squadron commander dismissed these suggestions as unnecessary complications that would increase the risk of friendly fire incidents and communications failures. Mitchell accepted this decision publicly, but continued to study reconnaissance photographs and intelligence reports, looking for tactical opportunities that might emerge during the actual attack. The intelligence picture regarding Truk's defenses was both comprehensive and alarming, with submarine reconnaissance and photographic analysis revealing defensive preparations that exceeded even the most pessimistic American estimates. Long-range patrol submarines had spent months mapping the lagoon's approaches, documenting radar installations, artillery positions, and aircraft dispersal areas while carefully avoiding detection by Japanese anti-submarine patrols. The resulting intelligence painted a picture of a fortress designed specifically to destroy attacking naval forces through coordinated defensive fire that would envelop incoming aircraft in overlapping fields of destruction. Japanese engineers had positioned anti-aircraft batteries to create interlocking coverage over every possible approach route, while fighter squadrons maintained constant patrols designed to intercept incoming attacks before they could achieve tactical surprise. Most concerning for American planners was evidence that Japanese commanders had developed sophisticated early warning networks that could detect approaching aircraft at distances exceeding 100 miles, providing ample time to scramble fighters and prepare anti-aircraft defenses. The mathematical challenge was clear. Conventional attack methods would face prepared defenses that could inflict unacceptable casualties on American forces, while unconventional approaches carried risks of coordination failures that might prove equally catastrophic. Mitchell studied these intelligence reports with particular attention to timing factors and defensive reaction patterns, noting that Japanese response procedures seemed designed to counter textbook American tactics rather than improvised or adaptive approaches. As February 17th dawned clear and calm over the Central Pacific, Task Force 58 had achieved complete strategic surprise, positioning its 6 fleet carriers within striking distance of Truk without detection by Japanese reconnaissance. The massive American formation included the carriers Enterprise, Yorktown, Belleauwood, Monterey, Bunker Hill, and Cowpens, supported by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers that represented the most powerful naval force ever assembled in the Pacific theater. Admiral Mark Mitcher had timed the approach to place his carriers in optimal position for dawn attacks, calculating that the low angle of morning sunlight would provide tactical advantages for American pilots, while creating visual difficulties for Japanese defenders. Mitchell stood on the flight deck of the Enterprise at 0400 hours, watching flight crews prepare aircraft for what everyone understood would be one of the most significant naval actions of the war. The carrier's deck bustled with organized chaos as ordnance crews loaded bombs and torpedoes, while plane captains conducted final engine checks and navigation system calibrations. The tension was palpable among pilots and aircrew, who understood that the success or failure of this operation could determine the course of the Pacific War for months to come. Mitchell felt the familiar pre-combat mixture of excitement and anxiety that accompanied every combat mission. But underlying these emotions was a growing conviction that the planned attack routes might not achieve the level of surprise necessary for complete success. The primary attack plan called for Mitchell's fighter squadron to provide high cover for dive bombers and torpedo planes approaching Truk from the northeast, following a route that would bring them over the lagoon at an altitude and heading designed to maximize bombing accuracy while minimizing exposure to anti-aircraft fire. This textbook approach had the advantage of simplicity and coordination, allowing squadron commanders to maintain visual contact with their aircraft while concentrating firepower on high-value targets. However, as Mitchell studied the final intelligence updates and weather reports, he noticed several factors that suggested alternative approaches might prove more effective. Wind conditions over the target area were creating thermal updrafts along the eastern side of the lagoon, which could affect bombing accuracy for aircraft following the planned route, while cloud formations to the southwest offered potential concealment for fighters approaching from unexpected directions. More significantly, latest intelligence suggested that Japanese radar installations were oriented primarily toward the northeast and northwest, the most likely approach routes for carrier-based aircraft operating from traditional positions. A careful analysis of these factors led Mitchell to conclude that a small force approaching from the southwest, flying low over the water to avoid radar detection, might achieve complete tactical surprise by arriving over the target area before defenders could react effectively. When Mitchell proposed this alternative approach to his squadron commander 30 minutes before lunchtime, he was told firmly that deviation from established flight plans was absolutely prohibited due to coordination requirements with other squadrons and the need to maintain strict timing throughout the attack sequence. The commander emphasized that individual initiative, however well-intentioned, could disrupt carefully orchestrated operations involving hundreds of aircraft and thousands of personnel. Mitchell acknowledged these orders respectfully, but found himself increasingly troubled by what he perceived as a fundamental mismatch between tactical opportunity and strategic constraint. As he climbed into his Hellcat and began pre-flight checks, Mitchell made a decision that would haunt his conscience and define his military career. He would follow orders during the initial approach, but would be prepared to improvise if battlefield conditions presented opportunities that could significantly enhance mission effectiveness. This internal compromise represented neither rebellion nor compliance, but rather a professional judgment about balancing individual initiative with collective responsibility. As his engine warmed and flight deck personnel signaled for engine start, Mitchell reviewed his navigation charts one final time, mentally calculating fuel consumption rates and timing factors for an alternative route that he hoped would never be necessary. The launch sequence proceeded with mechanical precision as Enterprise turned into the wind and began catapulting aircraft at 30-second intervals, each plane disappearing into the gray pre-dawn sky loaded with bombs, rockets, and ammunition intended to cripple Japanese naval power in the Central Pacific. Mitchell's Hellcat roared off the deck at 05:15 hours, joining a formation that included 12 other fighters tasked with protecting the strike aircraft during their approach and attack phases. The rendezvous proceeded according to plan as aircraft from multiple carriers formed up in the darkness, guided by radio beacons and navigation lights that would be extinguished as they approached enemy territory. As the massive formation headed toward Truk at cruising speed, Mitchell monitored radio communications and studied the tactical situation developing around him. The strike force included over 200 aircraft of various types, representing the largest coordinated attack mounted by American forces in the Pacific theater to date. Each squadron had specific targets and timing requirements designed to overwhelm Japanese defenses through simultaneous attacks on multiple objectives, preventing enemy commanders from concentrating defensive resources effectively. However, as the formation approached the point where individual squadrons would separate for their assigned attack routes, Mitchell became increasingly convinced that rigid adherence to predetermined plans might actually reduce the operation's effectiveness by making American intentions predictable to defending forces. The critical moment came as dawn began breaking over Truk Lagoon and the strike force reached the point where squadrons would separate for individual target approaches. Mitchell's fighter squadron was tasked with maintaining high cover over the main bomber formation as it approached from the northeast, providing protection against Japanese fighters while avoiding engagement with ground-based defenses. As the formation began its descent toward attack altitude, Mitchell observed several factors that had not been apparent during planning sessions, but now seemed critically important to mission success. Japanese radar installations were indeed concentrated on the lagoon's northeastern approaches, exactly as intelligence had suggested, and anti-aircraft batteries appeared to be oriented toward these same sectors. More importantly, he could see through breaks in the morning clouds that the main Japanese fleet was anchored in positions that would make them vulnerable to attacks from the southwest, particularly if those attacks could achieve complete surprise by approaching below radar coverage. The mathematical logic was compelling. A small force of fighters could penetrate Japanese defenses from an unexpected direction, mark targets for the main bomber force, and create confusion that would multiply the effectiveness of the coordinated attack. Mitchell's decision to break formation occurred at 0600 hours, precisely 37 minutes before the main attack was scheduled to begin. Rather than maintaining his assigned position, providing high cover for the bomber formation, he led his four-plane division in a rapid descent toward the ocean surface, heading southwest toward what reconnaissance had identified as a gap in Truk's barrier reef. His wingmen followed without question, trusting his judgment based on months of combat experience and tactical innovation that had consistently proved successful in previous operations. The maneuver violated direct orders but was executed with such confidence and precision that the other squadron pilots assumed it represented some last-minute tactical modification approved by higher command. As Mitchell's division disappeared below cloud cover, flying barely 50 feet above the ocean surface to avoid radar detection, the young pilot from Nebraska calculated fuel consumption rates and timing factors with the mechanical precision that had earned him the nickname Calculator during flight training. He understood that this unauthorized approach would either validate his tactical judgment or result in a court-martial for disobedience of direct orders during combat operations. The low-level approach through the reef gap required navigation skills and flying precision that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their operational limits. Mitchell led his division through coral formations that rose within feet of their aircraft, following a route that submarine reconnaissance had mapped months earlier, but which had never been attempted by carrier aircraft loaded with combat ordnance. The passage was barely wide enough for single-file flight, requiring each pilot to maintain perfect position while watching for coral heads that could destroy an aircraft instantly if struck by propeller or wing. The psychological pressure was intense as the four Hellcats threaded their way through natural obstacles while maintaining radio silence and avoiding any maneuver that might be detected by Japanese radar operators scanning for incoming attacks. Mitchell's navigation had to be perfect, since any deviation from the mapped route could lead them into impassable coral formations or water too shallow for safe flight. As they emerged from the reef gap into the lagoon's interior, Mitchell realized that his gamble had succeeded beyond his most optimistic calculations. They were now inside Japanese defensive perimeters without having triggered any defensive reactions, positioned to observe and attack the entire combined fleet from directions that enemy planners had considered impossible for coordinated air attack. The scene that greeted Mitchell's eyes as his division climbed to attack altitude inside Truk Lagoon represented the greatest concentration of enemy naval power that any American pilot had ever observed at close range. Spread across the anchorage were over 60 major warships, including battleships whose main guns could devastate entire cities, aircraft carriers capable of projecting air power across thousands of miles of ocean, and cruisers and destroyers that represented years of Japanese naval construction and technological development. Many of these vessels were taking on fuel and supplies, making them particularly vulnerable to incendiary attack, while others were conducting routine maintenance that had reduced their defensive readiness. Most critically, the surprise was so complete that most ships' crews were still at normal peacetime alert levels with anti-aircraft guns unmanned and damage control parties not yet at battle stations. Mitchell realized that his unauthorized penetration of Japanese defenses had created a tactical opportunity that might never occur again, the chance to attack the heart of enemy naval power when it was completely unprepared for combat. The mathematical implications were staggering, since successful attacks on major warships at anchor could eliminate more Japanese naval capability in one morning than months of conventional operations against scattered targets. The attack itself unfolded with devastating precision as Mitchell's four-plane division struck targets of opportunity while simultaneously broadcasting target information to the main strike force approaching from the northeast. Using hand signals to coordinate with his wingman, Mitchell selected a heavy cruiser of the Takao class as his primary target, approaching from the vessel's starboard quarter, where anti-aircraft coverage was minimal. His first strafing run achieved complete surprise, with 20mm cannon fire raking the cruiser's superstructure and igniting fuel and ammunition storage areas before defensive gunners could react. The explosion that followed was visible from 20 miles away as the cruiser's forward magazine detonated, sending debris and flame hundreds of feet into the air, while nearby vessels scrambled to respond to an attack they could not yet understand or locate. Mitchell's wingman struck a destroyer and two auxiliary vessels with equally devastating results, creating a pattern of destruction that drew Japanese defensive attention away from the northeastern approaches where the main American attack was now beginning. The psychological impact on enemy crews was as important as the physical damage, since the attacks from inside the lagoon created confusion and panic that disrupted defensive coordination throughout the anchorage. As the main strike force arrived over Truk precisely on schedule, they found Japanese defenses already disrupted by the chaos Mitchell's division had created. Anti-aircraft batteries that should have been concentrated on the incoming bombers were instead firing at targets already inside the lagoon, creating gaps in defensive coverage that allowed American aircraft to attack with minimal opposition. The coordination breakdown among Japanese defenders was so complete that many ships found themselves firing at their own vessels in the confusion, while communication systems became overloaded with conflicting damage reports and emergency calls for assistance. Mitchell continued to operate inside the defensive perimeter throughout the main attack, directing his wingmen against targets of opportunity while providing real-time intelligence about Japanese defensive reactions to squadron commanders controlling the primary bomber formations. His unauthorized position allowed him to observe the entire battle from a perspective that no American commander had ever experienced, providing tactical information that proved invaluable for maximizing the effectiveness of subsequent attack waves. The mathematics of destruction were overwhelming as bomb after bomb found targets throughout the anchorage, sending Japanese warships to the bottom of the lagoon in numbers that exceeded even the most optimistic pre-attack estimates. The immediate results of Mitchell's tactical innovation became apparent as the morning progressed, and damage assessments revealed the scope of destruction achieved by the coordinated attacks. Japanese losses included 3 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, 2 submarine tenders, and over 30 auxiliary vessels of various types, representing naval capability that would require years to replace under wartime construction limitations. More significantly, the attack had eliminated Truk's effectiveness as a forward operating base, forcing the Japanese Navy to withdraw surviving units to bases much farther from the front lines. The psychological impact was equally important, since the demonstration that even Japan's most heavily defended positions could be attacked successfully undermined confidence in defensive strategies throughout the Pacific theater. American losses were remarkably light considering the magnitude of the operation, with fewer than 20 aircraft lost and most aircrew successfully recovered by submarine rescue operations. The tactical success vindicated Mitchell's unauthorized deviation from planned attack routes, though it also raised uncomfortable questions about the balance between individual initiative and coordinated operations in modern warfare. Squadron commanders who had initially been horrified by Mitchell's apparent insubordination found themselves studying his tactical innovations for application in future operations. The intelligence gathered during and immediately after the attack provided American planners with unprecedented insight into Japanese naval capabilities and defensive strategies. Mitchell's real-time observations from inside the lagoon had revealed weaknesses in enemy coordination and communication systems that could be exploited in future operations, while photographic reconnaissance showed the extent to which Japanese naval power had been concentrated in supposedly secure bases. More importantly, the success of the surprise attack demonstrated that innovative tactics could achieve strategic objectives that might otherwise require much larger commitments of resources and personnel. The Japanese reaction to the Truk attack included immediate changes to defensive strategies and base security procedures throughout the Pacific, but these modifications came too late to prevent similar American operations against other major installations. Intelligence analysts noted that Japanese commanders had become so focused on defending against conventional attack methods that they had created vulnerabilities to unconventional approaches that aggressive American pilots were quick to exploit. The tactical lessons learned at Truk would influence American naval aviation doctrine for the remainder of the war and beyond. Mitchell's personal experience during the attack included moments of intense combat stress, balanced by periods of almost clinical detachment as he observed the destruction unfolding around him. Flying inside enemy defensive perimeters while coordinating with strike aircraft operating according to predetermined plans required constant mental calculation of timing, position, and tactical opportunity. The young pilot found himself simultaneously executing complex flying maneuvers, communicating with other aircraft, selecting and attacking targets, and analyzing Japanese defensive reactions for intelligence value. The psychological pressure was enormous, since any mistake could result not only in his own death, but potentially compromise the entire operation by alerting defenders to American tactical innovations. Despite these stresses, Mitchell later described the combat as intellectually satisfying in ways that routine missions never achieved, since it required the application of theoretical knowledge to rapidly changing tactical situations where individual decisions could have strategic consequences. His post-action report provided detailed analysis of Japanese defensive weaknesses and tactical opportunities that proved valuable for planning subsequent operations throughout the Pacific Campaign. The interrogation of captured Japanese personnel after the attack revealed the extent to which Mitchell's unauthorized approach had contributed to the overall success of the operation. Enemy officers consistently described the chaos and confusion created by attacks from inside the lagoon, which had disrupted defensive coordination at the most critical moments of the American assault. Japanese radar operators had detected the main strike force approaching from the northeast exactly as expected, but the simultaneous attacks from within their own defensive perimeter had overwhelmed communication systems and prevented effective coordination of countermeasures. Several captured officers specifically mentioned the psychological impact of realizing that American aircraft had somehow penetrated defenses that were considered impregnable, creating doubt and uncertainty that affected defensive effectiveness throughout the engagement. The intelligence value of these debriefings extended far beyond the Truk operation, providing insights into Japanese tactical thinking and defensive strategies that influenced American planning for major operations, including the Marianas Campaign and the eventual assault on the Japanese home islands. The weeks following the Truk attack saw intensive analysis of tactical innovations and their implications for future naval aviation operations. Mitchell found himself summoned to planning sessions with senior commanders who wanted to understand how his unauthorized approach had achieved such devastating results without triggering defensive reactions that should have made such penetration impossible. His detailed explanations of navigation techniques, timing calculations, and tactical decision-making processes were incorporated into training programs for other squadrons, though commanders remained deeply concerned about encouraging individual initiative that might undermine coordinated operations. The tension between innovation and discipline became a central theme in naval aviation doctrine development, with Mitchell's success serving as both positive example and cautionary tale about the risks of freelance heroics in complex military operations. Senior officers struggled to balance the obvious tactical advantages of adaptive leadership with the need for coordinated action that required strict adherence to predetermined plans and procedures. The debate continued throughout the war and influenced military leadership doctrine for decades afterward. Mitchell's post-war life reflected the same combination of innovation and modesty that had characterized his military service. Returning to Nebraska after the war, he used his veteran's benefits to complete an engineering degree while working part-time at the same Offutt airfield, where he had learned to work on aircraft before enlisting. His technical skills and combat experience made him valuable to the rapidly expanding aviation industry, but he chose to remain in the Midwest rather than pursuing opportunities in major aircraft manufacturing centers. He married his high school sweetheart in 1946 and raised 4 children while working as a civilian flight instructor and aircraft maintenance supervisor. Mitchell rarely spoke about his combat experiences, except to close friends and family, preferring to focus on the technical aspects of aviation rather than the dramatic circumstances of his wartime service. His former squadron mates who visited over the years were struck by his complete lack of pretension about his role in one of the most successful naval operations of the Pacific War. When pressed for details about his decision to break formation over Truk, Mitchell typically responded that he had simply done what seemed tactically sensible at the time, without considering the larger implications of his actions. The letters and testimonies from aircrew who had participated in the Truk operation provided compelling evidence of the long-term impact of Mitchell's tactical innovation on American naval aviation capabilities. Pilots who had observed his unauthorized penetration of enemy defenses later applied similar thinking to other operations, developing adaptive approaches that significantly enhanced the effectiveness of coordinated attacks against heavily defended targets. Squadron commanders began incorporating tactical flexibility into their planning processes, allowing for real-time modifications of attack routes and target selections based on battlefield conditions observed by lead aircraft. The doctrinal changes that emerged from analysis of the Truk operation influenced American military thinking about the balance between centralized planning and decentralized execution, with Mitchell's success serving as a case study in the value of empowering individual leaders to make tactical decisions within the framework of strategic objectives. These lessons proved valuable not only for the remainder of World War II, but also for subsequent conflicts where technological complexity and rapid tactical changes required adaptive leadership at all levels of military organization. The mathematical precision with which Mitchell had calculated fuel consumption, navigation requirements, and timing factors for his unauthorized approach became a subject of intense study by military analysts seeking to understand how individual decision-making could achieve strategic results. His ability to visualize three-dimensional tactical problems and develop solutions in real time demonstrated the importance of technical education and analytical thinking in modern warfare. The calculations he had performed in his head while flying through coral reefs under combat conditions were later verified by operations research analysts who found his estimates of distance, fuel usage, and timing to be remarkably accurate considering the stress and complexity of the tactical situation. This mathematical approach to tactical problem-solving became a standard element of pilot training, with instructors emphasizing the importance of quantitative analysis in making decisions under pressure. Mitchell's example showed that successful military leadership required not only courage and flying skill, but also the intellectual capacity to analyze complex situations and identify innovative solutions that others might overlook. The transformation of American naval aviation doctrine following the Truk operation reflected broader changes in military thinking about the relationship between technology, tactics, and individual initiative. Mitchell's success had demonstrated that modern warfare required leaders capable of adapting to rapidly changing conditions, rather than simply following predetermined procedures developed under different circumstances. The emphasis on flexibility and innovation that emerged from analysis of his tactical decisions influenced training programs throughout the Navy, with instructors encouraging students to think creatively about tactical problems while maintaining respect for coordination requirements and strategic objectives. These changes prepared American military forces for the technological and tactical challenges of subsequent conflicts, where rapid decision-making and adaptive leadership would prove essential for success against opponents who had studied and prepared countermeasures for conventional approaches. The intellectual framework that Mitchell had applied to the tactical challenges of carrier aviation became a model for military leadership education that emphasized analytical thinking and creative problem-solving within the context of disciplined military organization. The physical evidence of Mitchell's impact on the Truk operation remained visible for decades after the war as divers and historians explored the sunken remains of Japanese warships throughout the lagoon. The specific vessels that his four-plane division had attacked showed damage patterns that could be traced directly to the strafing and rocket attacks they had conducted while operating inside enemy defensive perimeters. Archaeological analysis of wreck sites provided detailed confirmation of the tactical effectiveness of his approach, showing how attacks from unexpected directions had achieved devastating results with minimal expenditure of ordnance. The preservation of these underwater historical sites allowed subsequent generations of military historians to study the physical evidence of tactical innovation and its strategic consequences. The wrecks served as permanent monuments to the effectiveness of adaptive leadership and technological innovation in achieving military objectives that conventional approaches might not have accomplished. The legacy of Mitchell's unauthorized tactical innovation extended far beyond the immediate results of the Truk operation to influence fundamental concepts of military leadership and strategic thinking. His willingness to accept responsibility for decisions that violated direct orders while achieving tactical objectives that served broader strategic goals became a case study in the complex relationship between individual initiative and institutional authority. Military academies incorporated analysis of his decision-making process into curricula designed to prepare future leaders for situations where rigid adherence to procedures might prove less effective than adaptive approaches, based on real-time analysis of tactical opportunities. The intellectual framework he had demonstrated, combining technical knowledge, mathematical analysis, and creative thinking under extreme pressure, became a standard for military leadership that emphasized competence and judgment over simple obedience to authority. These concepts influenced military doctrine development for decades after the war, shaping approaches to leadership training and tactical education that recognize the importance of empowering individual commanders to make decisions based on their assessment of tactical situations. The broader historical significance of the Truk operation and Mitchell's role in its success extended to fundamental questions about the nature of military innovation and its relationship to strategic effectiveness. His demonstration that individual tactical innovation could achieve strategic results that conventional approaches might not accomplish challenged traditional thinking about the relationship between centralized planning and decentralized execution in military operations. The success of his unauthorized approach suggested that modern warfare required organizational structures that could accommodate and encourage innovative thinking while maintaining the coordinations and discipline necessary for effective military action. These lessons proved relevant not only for military organizations, but also for civilian institutions facing complex challenges that required both systematic planning and adaptive implementation. The intellectual framework that Mitchell had applied to tactical problem-solving became a model for leadership in situations requiring rapid decision-making under pressure with incomplete information and conflicting priorities. As historians and military analysts continued to study the Truk operation and its implications for understanding effective leadership and tactical innovation, Mitchell's example provided enduring insights into the qualities required for success in complex, high-pressure situations. His combination of technical competence, analytical thinking, and moral courage represented a leadership model that transcended the specific circumstances of naval aviation in World War II. The mathematical precision with which he had calculated tactical options, the creativity with which he had identified innovative approaches, and the professional judgment with which he had balanced individual initiative against institutional authority demonstrated principles that remained relevant for leaders facing challenges in rapidly changing technological and strategic environments. His willingness to accept personal responsibility for decisions that served broader objectives while violating specific procedures illustrated the complex moral and professional calculations required of effective military leadership. The enduring study of his tactical decisions and their strategic consequences continued to provide valuable lessons for understanding how individual competence and institutional effectiveness could be combined to achieve objectives that neither centralized planning nor decentralized action could accomplish independently. The final irony of James Harrison Mitchell's contribution to American victory in the Pacific was that he never sought recognition for the tactical innovation that helped achieve one of the most decisive naval victories of World War II. Throughout his post-war life, he consistently deflected attention from his individual role in the Truk operation, preferring to emphasize the collective effort of all personnel who had participated in the complex coordination required for such a large-scale military action. When military historians contacted him for interviews about his tactical decisions, he typically focused on the technical aspects of navigation and aircraft performance, rather than the personal courage required to break formation and penetrate enemy defenses alone. His modesty about his contribution reflected a professional understanding that individual heroism, however dramatically successful, achieved strategic significance only within the context of broader military campaigns that required the coordinated efforts of thousands of personnel working toward common objectives. The mathematical elegance of his tactical solution and the strategic impact of his decision to break orders represented a perfect example of how personal initiative and institutional authority could combine to achieve results that neither could accomplish alone. The question that Mitchell's example poses for contemporary leaders facing complex challenges with incomplete information and conflicting priorities remains as relevant today as it was over the waters of Truk Lagoon on February 17, 1944. His willingness to break direct orders in service of tactical objectives that served broader strategic goals illustrated the kind of moral and professional judgment required when institutional procedures conflict with situational requirements for effective action. The mathematical precision with which he calculated tactical options, the creative intelligence with which he identified innovative approaches, and the professional courage with which he accepted responsibility for decisions that might have resulted in court-martial demonstrated leadership qualities that transcended the specific circumstances of naval aviation in World War II. As you consider the leaders in your own life who have faced similar choices between following procedures and pursuing more effective approaches to achieving important objectives, would you have possessed the technical competence, analytical thinking, and moral courage to break formation when breaking formation was the only way to achieve victory? Comment below and share this story, so others remember that sometimes the greatest service to institutional authority requires the courage to act beyond the limitations of institutional procedures.